In 1792, Congress sat down and wrote a definition for the American dollar. Not a symbol, not a number on a screen, an actual physical definition. $1 was 371.25 grains of pure silver, or, at a fixed exchange rate, 24.75 grains of pure gold. The law set the ratio between the two metals at 15-1, and for the next several decades, that was what money literally was in this country. Today, if you ask what a dollar is defined by in terms of a physical commodity, the answer is nothing. No metal backs it, no law defines it in grains of anything. And yet silver never actually left the economy, it just changed jobs. It stopped being money you carry in your pocket and became something built into your car, your phone, and increasingly, the equipment running the AI boom. That's the real story here. Not silver is about to explode. Something more useful than that. Silver is one of the few assets still living a double life. Part monetary metal, part industrial material, and that split personality is exactly why it behaves in ways that confuse most investors. By the end of this video, you'll understand why silver can rally on inflation fears one year and get crushed by a factory slowdown the next, why a shortage in the silver market doesn't mean what you think it means, and why the popular pitch you've probably heard, that solar is booming so silver has to keep going up, is only half true. Money needs a few boring but essential qualities. It has to be scarce enough that you can't just make more of it. It has to be easy to divide into smaller units. It has to last without rotting or rusting. And it has to be something people instantly recognize as valuable. Silver checks every box, and it's checked those boxes for a very long time. Records from Mesopotamia, going back roughly 5,000 years, already show silver functioning as a unit of account and a medium of exchange. Not the only monetary tool humans ever used. Copper, grain, and various credit systems played roles too. But silver kept showing up, century after century, civilization after civilization, as one of the metals people trusted to store and move value. By the time the United States was founded, using silver as money wasn't an experiment. It was inheriting thousands of years of precedent. Most retellings of this story get lazy here. They say, a dollar was silver, full stop, as if the definition sat frozen for decades. It didn't. The original law fixed the gold-to-silver ratio at 15-1. But metal prices don't sit still, and by the 1830s, that ratio no longer matched what gold and silver were actually worth relative to each other on the open market. So Congress changed it. The gold content of the dollar was adjusted, while the silver definition stayed at 371.25 grains, which quietly shifted the ratio to roughly 16-1. That's a small detail with a big implication. The government wasn't just defining money once and walking away. It was actively managing the relationship between two metals, adjusting it as conditions changed. Even hard money, backed by metal, has always required judgment calls from whoever's in charge of defining it. In 1873, Congress passed a Coinage Act that quietly dropped the provision allowing people to bring silver to the mint and have it struck into standard silver dollars on demand. Almost nobody noticed at the time. They noticed a few years later, once people connected the change to the deflation and economic pain that followed, and critics started calling it the crime of 1873, accusing a small group of financial interests of quietly rigging the law to benefit creditors at the expense of everyone else, especially farmers and debtors. Here's what's actually solid. The law did end free coinage of silver, and it did help push the country toward a gold standard. Deflation did follow in the years after. What's not settled is the causal chain. Even economists who are otherwise skeptical of heavy government intervention have argued the 1873 Act was a policy mistake with real economic costs. But historians still debate how much of the era's pain came specifically from that one law versus broader forces already moving through the world's monetary systems at the time. A single deliberate conspiracy that wrecked the economy on its own is a more satisfying story than the evidence actually supports. The honest version is a real law, a real controversy, real consequences, and a genuinely unresolved historical debate about intent. By 1971, when the dollar's last remaining tie to gold convertibility was severed, silver had already largely disappeared from everyday American coinage. Dimes and quarters had been stripped of silver back in 1965, years before that final break from gold. Silver's exit from circulating money was a slow fade, not a single dramatic moment. But instead of disappearing from the economy altogether, silver found a new role, and this one has nothing to do with coins. Silver is the best electrical conductor of any metal on the periodic table. It's also highly resistant to corrosion and performs reliably under heat. Those properties make it close to irreplaceable in a specific set of high-performance applications: solar panels, electric vehicles, and increasingly, the components running AI infrastructure. In 2025, industrial uses accounted for roughly 657 million ounces of silver demand, out of about 1.13 billion ounces of total demand. Run that math, and industrial use makes up right around 58% of everything silver is used for in a given year. So when people say silver is mostly an industrial metal now, that's not an exaggeration. It's the majority use case. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where the easy version of this story falls apart. You'd assume that if industrial demand is the majority of silver's use, and solar and EVs and AI are all expanding, industrial silver demand should be climbing every year. In 2025, it actually fell, about 3%. The biggest pressure came from solar. Manufacturers have gotten aggressive about using less silver per panel, thinning the metal, substituting cheaper materials where they can, redesigning cell structures to need less silver conductor. That trend is called thrifting, and it's happening fast enough that it's now outpacing the growth in the actual number of panels being installed. Electronics demand softened too, so it wasn't a solar-only story, but solar was the clearest driver of the decline. So you end up with a situation that sounds contradictory but isn't. Global solar capacity keeps growing, and silver demand from solar can still shrink. More of the product doesn't automatically mean more of the material inside it. That's a lesson that applies well beyond silver. Anytime you're evaluating a commodity tied to a growing technology, the real question isn't, is the technology growing? It's, is the material intensity per unit staying the same? If solar is cooling as a growth driver, what's picking up the slack? Two places. First, electric vehicles. Industry estimates put silver loading around 15 to 28 grams in a typical gas-powered car, versus roughly 25 to 50 grams in a battery electric vehicle, depending on the vehicle's architecture and electronics load. Take the midpoints, about 21.5 grams for a gas car, about 37.5 grams for an EV, and a BEV uses somewhere around 74% more silver than a comparable gas vehicle. That's a meaningful jump, even if it's nowhere near the double the silver figure you'll sometimes see thrown around online. Second, and this is the one worth watching going forward, AI data centers. Silver shows up in high-frequency connectors, power modules, chip packaging, and thermal management components, anywhere electrical performance and reliability really matter. Industry forecasts expect data centers alone to account for more than 10% of all electrical and electronics-related silver demand by 2027. That's a rapidly emerging demand source that was barely meaningful as a market driver a decade ago, showing up right as solar demand is leveling off. You've probably heard some version of, the silver market has run a deficit for years and it's nearly 1 billion ounces now. It's a real trend, but the number usually gets rounded up in a way that isn't accurate. The latest estimates put the cumulative drawdown from above-ground stocks since 2021 at approximately 762 million ounces, not 1 billion. That's still enormous, but remember what that number actually represents. It's a stock drawdown, not 762 million ounces of silver disappearing. The market is heading into a sixth consecutive year in which demand exceeds new supply from mining and recycling. But inflating that 762 million figure to nearly 1 billion overstates it by around 30%, and you don't need to exaggerate a real trend to make it compelling. Here's the part that actually matters more than the headline number, though. A market deficit does not mean silver is running out. It means demand exceeded new supply from mining and recycling in a given year. The gap gets filled from somewhere. Existing exchange inventories, ETF holdings that get sold down, and other above-ground stockpiles that have built up over years or decades. That above-ground pool isn't one giant warehouse of easily available metal either. Some of it is tied up in jewelry, industrial products, or private holdings that don't move quickly even when prices rise. So the real question isn't, are we going to run out of silver? It's how much of the readily available portion of that buffer is left, and how tight does it get before that scarcity actually shows up in the price. The bullish argument usually adds one more layer. Silver supply can't respond to higher prices because most of it comes as a byproduct of mining lead, zinc, gold, and copper. Miners aren't digging primarily for silver, so a higher silver price doesn't necessarily mean more silver gets dug up. That's broadly true, and it does mean silver supply is relatively slow to react in the short run compared to a commodity mined specifically for its own market. But slow to react is not the same as can't react at all. Higher prices still make previously uneconomic deposits worth developing, encourage exploration, and push recycling higher. In fact, 2025 recycling hit about 197.6 million ounces, a 13-year high, and mine production is forecast to climb roughly 1% to around 820 million ounces in 2026. The supply side moves. It just moves on a longer clock than industrial or investment demand does. This is where silver earns its reputation as the more complicated, more dangerous, and honestly more interesting metal of the two. Gold's story is much more heavily monetary and investment driven. Central banks buy it. Investors buy it as a hedge against currency risk. Jewelry plays a real role too, but very little gold gets used up in a way that removes it from circulation permanently. Most gold ever mined still exists somewhere, in a vault, in jewelry, sitting quietly. That gives gold a kind of stability. Its price responds mainly to financial conditions: interest rates, the dollar, geopolitical stress, central bank behavior. Silver responds to all of that too. But it also responds to something gold barely touches: the health of the physical, industrial economy. When a recession hits, factory orders slow down, solar installations get delayed, and car sales soften, and silver can get hit from two directions at once: industrial demand dropping right as investors are also nervous. Gold, in that same recession, can actually benefit from the flight to safety. That's the single biggest structural difference between the two metals, and it's the reason silver has historically been significantly more volatile. You'll see people quote the gold to silver ratio, simply gold's price divided by silver's price, and treat a high number as proof silver is cheap and about to catch up. It's worth understanding, but it isn't a trading signal on its own. The ratio moves because monetary demand and industrial demand for the two metals shift independently, because interest rates change, because investor positioning swings, and because the two metals have fundamentally different supply structures. So if you're looking at the gold-silver ratio, the real question isn't simply whether silver looks cheap. It's whether the conditions that make silver different from gold, the industrial exposure, the substitution risk, the recession sensitivity, are shifting in silver's favor or against it. Put it all together, and silver isn't cheap gold waiting to catch up, and it isn't a guaranteed inflation hedge either. It's something more specific: a monetary metal whose price is increasingly steered by whether factories, car makers, and data centers need it. That cuts both ways. The case for silver includes real structural demand from EVs and AI, a genuine multi-year deficit, record recycling that still hasn't closed the gap, and a shrinking buffer of easily accessible above-ground inventory. The case against it is just as real. Manufacturers respond to high prices by using less silver. Recessions hit silver's industrial demand in a way they don't hit gold, and the market's own deficit gets solved partly by drawing down stockpiles rather than by prices spiking on their own. Buying silver isn't a single bet on inflation, the way people often frame it. It's a bet on monetary conditions, industrial demand, mining supply, recycling behavior, and substitution trends, all moving at once. That complexity is exactly why silver rewards people who understand what they're actually holding and punishes people who bought it because a headline made it sound simple. If you had to hold one metal for the next 10 years and couldn't touch it, would you choose gold for its stability or silver for its higher upside and higher risk? Tell me which one you'd pick and why in the comments. And if you want the other side of this story, the gold breakdown is right here.